The reason why Screwtape Letters is so profound to me is that I saw myself as the patient.
He dramatizes the choice making that we do on a moment to moment basis that is either corrupting or sanctifying our soul.
It's proving the existence of Satan
Oh,
and
yes.
showing how
Yes.
demonic presence actually does exist in the real world in the day-to-day.
I started working with Screwtape 20 years ago. It ran in New York for 9 months at the West Side Theater. We had a sold-out run in London.
You and I are sitting here in the wake of a political assassination. This is the environment in which Screwtape Letters was written.
It gave me a picture of spiritual warfare that has stuck with me all these years.
I'm Nicole Shanahan. Welcome to Back to the People podcast, which highlights the growth of a movement uniting America, where our government is free from corporate capture and where we give voice back to the American public. Mr. Max McLean, thank you so much for joining me today on Back to the People podcast. You are a Panamanian-born American stage actor, writer, producer, and founder of the Fellowship for Performing Arts, FPA, a New York-based company producing theater and film from a Christian worldview. And the reason why I'm excited to speak with you today is that I recently finished reading the Screwtape Letters, and it just so happens you are on the road with a performance, a full performance, stage performance of the Screwtape Letters. You're traveling the United States. You're going to be here in California shortly, and I bought a bunch of tickets for my churches,
Oh, wow. Great.
and they will be attending your San Jose and Santa Barbara shows. I am just fascinated by the Screwtape Letters and C.S. Lewis. He was a former atheist, and he is one of the most complex thinkers and intellectuals, producing a entire volume of short books covering the most complex issues of Christianity.
I agree.
And I don't even know how you turn that into a stage play.
Well, we've been at it for a long time. Let me back up with my own history with the Screwtape Letters. I'm an adult convert to Christianity in my 20s, and the Screwtape Letters was after reading the New Testament, the Screwtape Letters was one of the first books that was given me to read, and it gave me a picture of spiritual warfare that has stuck with me all these years. Now, I never saw it as theatrical literature. Lewis had no intention of putting it on stage or he was writing a a satire, a reverse devotional, if it were. But I had about 20 years later, maybe even longer, a theater professor saw some of our other work, other stage productions, and he wrote me an email, and he said to me in the email, "I think you," meaning me, "would make a really good Screwtape." And I didn't know if that was a compliment or not, but that's how it started.
And for our listeners who haven't read the Screwtape Letters, because it's tough to get through, it's written from the perspective of a demon or a tempter that is in charge of I guess that tempter is in the body of a therapist, so a psychotherapist, and the patient is the target that they're trying to convert away from Christianity towards Satan.
Yeah, that's
So
that's well put. It's uh, as a theatrical piece, we made it a predator prey story. Screwtape is the predator, and this patient, this unsuspecting human on Earth, is the prey. And so the challenge of the story is, will the predator get its prey? And it's very interesting that Screwtape calls him the patient. You and I think of a patient as someone in need of healing. In Screwtape's world, a patient is someone in need of corrupting, of damnation, of bringing towards damnation. And so the story arc that we followed, that determined what material from the book itself that we would use, is we followed basically two story arcs. What happens to the patient who begins the story as relatively indifferent to Christianity and spirituality in general. And by the end of the story, he is in a very significant state of grace, which is incredibly disruptive to Screwtape. And then the other arc, the more theatrical arc, is what happens to Screwtape, who begins the story as this master of the universe character, loves the way he looks, loves the way he talks, loves the way he dresses, smartest guy in the room, pure pride. And by the end of the story, he is in a place of defeat. And in and in that case, our theatrical adaptation is very faithful to Lewis's vision. The words we use are Lewis's words. 95+% of the book of the story is using Lewis's words because we actually trusted his intellect and the constellation of ideas that he is presenting. But we also followed the book's uh, story arc, its dramaturgical story arc uh, to tell our story.
It is such complicated language that C.S. Lewis writes with. It's hard to explain how he uses these long compound sentences, and doesn't move linearly from sentence to sentence. Almost, it's just idea, as an idea somewhere in the taxonomy brought in, and then another idea, and then a conclusion. And it's very hard to read, so much so that I've gifted Screwtape Letters to many people, and it's such a different level of literature than what we're used to seeing as, the narrative or the biography, um, stance, and so many people have a really hard time following it. And so when I heard that you were doing a stage play, I was quite worried. I was like, are people intellectual enough to understand and follow this storyline?
Well, that's the nature of theater is in a certain sense to bring it down to a lower shelf, to visualize it, to to make it uh, understandable, and just using the example you just gave of how Lewis writes, which is I think you presented it, you explained it quite well. Um, he may have a 75-word sentence. Uh, our job as theater artists is to encapsulate those 75 words in about 20 words
Mhm.
and make sure that the words we use are his. So that we're not taking these little byways and highway, we're getting right to the action of that sentence. One of my favorite lines in the book, and it's actually almost the essence of the whole story in one line, is the safest road to hell is the gradual one, the gentle slope, soft underfoot, without milestones or signposts. So that's a shrinkage of the actual words he used, but the essence is completely there. One more point on that. If you get the audio book of the Screwtape Letters, which includes the toast, and we have the toast in ours as well, or at least
The toast is brilliant,
yeah,
written about 20, 30 years later?
yeah, it was for the Saturday Evening Post, yeah, for
Mm.
1959. But if you get the audiobook, it'll take you about 6 hours to go through it, and of course we knew people don't want to stay that long. So our play is about 80-85 minutes, but there's 31 letters plus the toast, and our
Mhm.
play touches on 24 of the 31 letters, but it selects along the lines of the dramaturgical arcs we mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Max, I wish everyone could read this, because reading the Screwtape Letters foundationally changed I was brand new to Christianity, baptized at the beginning of this year.
Oh,
Before
congratulations.
that, thank you very much. And I've shared my journey online with my followers, and I have really the reason why Screwtape Letters is so profound to me is that I saw myself as the patient. I have lived my life as the patient. And this story was written in the 40s. It was during World War One and World War One, correct?
Two,
Go leading
two.
World War Two, leading into World War Two. Um, and it was so incredible. And then 30 years later, he writes, Screwtape proposes a toast, which is this ceremonial feast for demons and tempters in which Screwtape gives this incredible speech. I mean, it's it's like it's just so wildly well done, and where he describes what they're looking for. It's a motivational speech for the tempters as they go out and find more and more patients to convert away from God, the enemy, into the realm of Satan.
Mhm.
And it describes the different kinds of souls, that there's some juicier souls and less juicier and dry souls. And I look back on my life and I was like, I was a patient. I was being tempted. I can pinpoint, it still comes to me. I have these flashes of memories from my 20s and 30s. I turned 40 next Friday. And I have flashes of memories from my 20s and 30s where I was being tempted. These were active temptations by Satan, and they weren't overt. They weren't obvious. They were subtle. And all of the patient's characteristics are characteristics that I had and I still have. Intellectualism, an interest in fashionability, easily distracted, thinking I don't really need God, like I'm pretty good on my own. Choosing friendships based on how shiny and interesting and intellectual they are versus how good they are, right? And just this attraction to entertainment and the next big thing, and I'm better, and I'm this, and just these, it's gradual corruption. And before I knew it, I was a dish at that feast, and probably a pretty important dish. They describe Hitler as being a fine wine. Um, and my joke when I talk to fellow Christians is I think I was like a caviar dish.
Well, your story, in one sense, echoes Lewis's story because he wrote that using his own battles with temptation. Of course, he's writing it after the fact. It would be if you wrote your own autobiography of your spiritual awakening. Uh, it would be like that. So the reason you resonate, I believe, the reason most people resonate with the Screwtape Letters is because Lewis is being so transparent about his own experience. Early on, there's a letter about when he goes to church for the first time. He's looking so smugly and at these people that don't fit, his idea of who he should be hanging out with. And so, and it's, I don't have the line right in front of me. I wish I had the book, but it was like, keep him in that state of mind. He hasn't been with the enemy long enough to have had any real humility yet. Keep him in that state of mind as long as you can.
So I know exactly what part of the story you're talking about. He's trying to decide if he wants to go to a different church, the patient,
Yeah.
because the church he's at, the individuals there are of a different socioeconomic class. And then Screwtape goes into incredible detail about how you want to convince him to church hop,
Yes. Yes, that's right.
right? To abandon these Christians that are just not good enough for him.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Because the worst thing the enemy can do is instill the kind of righteous faith within a human that they're there to worship with all of God's people and to stay at that church in absolute surrender to the divine authority of God, which is the enemy in this case,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
And it's so interesting, Max, because I was going through that exact same thing when I read that. I had joined this tiny little church. No one knew who I was. I walked in And it was, there were people there who are on welfare. It was tiny. It was a new congregation of about 20 people in the room, but I loved it. Incredible worship team. But even then, like, I was like, am I just coming for the worship team? Should I contribute? How do I contribute? Because this is a new church and they're trying to strike the right chord with such a diverse group of people. How do you preach to such a diverse group of people? And it's a small congregation. So if you lose five of them, that's like a good percent of your congregation. And I did consider if this was the right place for me, and I just kept going and kept going, and it is the right place for me. And I read that part of the Screwtape Letters, and it was like putting up a mirror to a part of my psyche that I otherwise wouldn't have seen or
Yeah.
known. It's really fascinating. Did you have experiences like that in your 20s when you read the Screwtape Letters?
I did because, the way you described it was quite right, and the way Lewis described it was quite right. He says, I'm going to a place that's filled with people that I have hitherto avoided.
Mhm.
And yet he also points out, and this is interesting, that Screwtape points it out, is that some of these people are so far along uh, in the enemy's camp that he can't even, shine. He shouldn't even be able to shine their boots, because they have such extraordinary uh, graces within them that as a new believer he cannot see. And I thought, that's so enlightening. Lewis, I think, was echoing some Pauline theology where he says we must not be ignorant of the devil's schemes. He masquerades as an angel of light. So that's what he's trying to expose uh, all of that. And that's why the book still resonates. What is it, 75, 80 years later?
Yeah. No, it resonates so perfectly. I'm trying to imagine you, Max, as a young man in theater, coming into the Screw Tape Letters, reading it for the first time, and trying to decide what you're going to do with your career. Because taking on theater from the viewpoint of C.S. Lewis is very hard, and I imagine at times unpopular.
Well, I used to care about the popularity point, and I do think of that as an element of growth, because it doesn't bother me. I realize that every choice that you make as an artist, uh, it comes from a very particular place, and is in some set has its audience. So you're playing to what you're playing to your own passion. I was very passionate about this. Now, I will say that I didn't really anticipate that it would have as long of a life as had. I started working with Screwtape 20 years ago as a theatrical piece, and most of the time with any theater piece, you work on it for 3 to 4 to 6 months, and you have your run, and then you move on to something else. But that wasn't the case with Screwtape. In fact, we had several development productions of it. The first couple were not quite good, and would probably fall into the description of what you might have feared in terms of how to make this complicated story into a theatrical play. But because we kept trying, because we knew we had something, we kept working on it. So we did two productions, and then it found itself, and it ran in New York for 9 months at the West Side Theater. We've had a sold out run in London. We've had national tours
Wow.
forever. Uh, the current the two actors that play Screwtape independently, I'm no longer playing it. One played Scar on The Lion King, which is a Screwtape of that story, and the other we just hired him as and that was Brent Harris, and we just hired the new actor Gregory Allen Jackson, because it's such a demanding role. I mean, it's part Iago, part Hannibal Lecter, a little bit of Lewis Black, all of those mixed in with this incredible use of language. So you have to have really, really extraordinary, gifted actors in terms of being able to use their voice and articulate. He goes, "What is an actor? Actor is somebody that uses, his body as his own musical instrument, uses his body, his voice, his mind to articulate great literature." And in that case, you can't get much better than this.
Yeah. It's interesting. In our world today, especially online, you'll see a lot of people posting a video and then labeling that video as that's demonic. And my confusion is how do you know? How do you know what is demonic? How do you know what is the work of Satan? Because in my curiosity with religion, God, spirituality, and now Christ, you oftentimes hear about the spiritual realm from the context of Jesus. And I've never felt confident in assessing the work of Satan. And in fact, some churches even say, let's not talk about Satan. Like, let's leave him out altogether. And much of the theological world made for mass consumption is like just repent from Satan. But how do you know what to repent from if you're not aware of Satan's work? And that's what has brought me to such gratitude in having read the Screwtape Letters, doing this awful work that I mean, C.S. Lewis must not have enjoyed writing this. This is gross. Like, you read Screwtape Letters and you just feel absolutely awful, gross, icky, but, like, a part of me, because I'm such, like, a curious person, was like, "I have to keep going. This is insane. Like, I this is wildly informative. I have to just keep persevering through these awful letters where Screwtape and Wormwood are going back and forth, and Screwtape is trying to get Wormwood to do this great demon tempting work, and he's not the easiest boss. I mean, he's an awful toxic boss. But I'm in it and I'm reading it and I can't wait to read the next letter because I'm learning. I'm learning how demonic presence works in this world. And I need to know.
Well, let me respond to that because I think that's really, really perceptive. And I think you're absolutely right when I think it's a mistake to avoid it, to avoid trying to, how do I know? That's a really good question. Lewis helps us in so many ways, certainly in the Screw Tape Letters, but I do think that we've been sort of programmed to think of the demonic activity more along the lines of The Exorcist, really big, brutal uh, uh, expressions of evil. And Lewis really goes the other way. He goes with a rather minimalist approach, but it's the more universal understanding. And I think it's in Mere Christianity, he makes this point that I think answers the question, or at least helps to answer the question you're asking about how do you know. And he writes this. He says, every time you and I make a choice, and you and I make, in the course of an hour, a day, a year, a lifetime, we make dozens, hundreds, thousands, millions of unique small choices to get through our day, to get through our week, get through our life. And Lewis says that every time we make a choice, the central part of our being, the part that chooses, our soul, uh, changes just a little bit. And each time it's becoming either a more heavenly creature or a more hellish creature. And it depends on the individual choices that you make. And so what he does in the Screwtape Letters is he dramatizes the the choice making that we do on a daily, moment to moment basis that is either corrupting or sanctifying our soul.
Yeah. And it's interesting because the patient is this young man. He's not yet married and he's very smart. He appears to be upper middle class, educated, social. And C.S. Lewis spends a large amount of time discussing romance and love
Mm.
for this young man. And if Christians will often say marriage is like the most important covenant you'll make with God. I wish I knew that in my 20s. And that his choice and discovery and pursuit of true love is a perfect avenue for Wormwood, the tempter, to kind of mess with his psyche, make him feel insecure, turn away from love, think about it as just mere sexual attraction, lust. So he's trying to, Wormwood, who's this young man's therapist, is trying to rewrite the priorities in this young man's mind about how he should be thinking about the pursuit of a girlfriend.
Yes, yes, and Lewis does speak about that. Uh, he starts with Screwtape is saying that the person had a religious experience that was very significant, and that puts Screwtape behind the eight ball, as it were, and really stuck. And so his advice to Wormwood is, let's find a suitable marriage. Suitable to him would be a disastrous marriage. And I'm sure there's several women in the patient's neighborhood who render the Christian life intensely difficult if you could persuade him to marry one of them. That's Screwtape's advice. And then he says, send me a report on this when you next write. And then he said he doesn't get a letter. So he goes back to the well and says, well, we've worked on a human sexual taste. That's been something that real masters that are far deeper down the hierarchy than you and I have been working on for centuries. At one time, we directed the male taste to the statuesque, aristocratic beauty, mixing men's vanity with their desires. At another, we directed the man to the more feminine type, faint, languishing, so their folly, cowardice, and general falseness was at stake. Now we direct men's passions to women that look more and more like boys. And this is in the 40s, and he goes, and so he has this plan, and the basics of the plan includes that it makes women puts women in an impossible situation that they cannot, uh, they just because the the male taste has been so idealized that it can never be realized.
Yeah, yeah. What? How did C.S. Lewis? And I'm sure you've done a historical review of who he was as a person outside of his works. Is there, what was he a prophet? Where was he getting this information from? I know he was good friends with Tolkien, who has like a similar imagination, but C.S. Lewis is very different from Tolkien. C.S. Lewis has a realism to him. He's not trying to create science fiction to tell his stories. He's outside of Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the rest of his writings are very much based in a realism, almost like a documentary style review of what is happening within spiritual warfare.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he was a teacher. He read everything from the Greeks to the moderns. He had a steel trap mind that could remember everything he wrote. He had this rather unique and incredible ability to translate what he read into magnificent prose and speech. And as an adult, he was a convert. His conversion happened when he was just before his 32nd birthday. He did it all under the headship of Christ. And so, in that sense, he was a prophet, but he was a prophet in the intellectual and literary sense. Uh, he was trained with a teacher who uh, who was really big on dialectical arguments, and so he could argue in that way. Uh, but he also had this imaginative streak. He was quite voluble, loved to debate. Some people said he was a bit of a bully, in in that, although in personal relationships he was intensely kind, but he fought the good fight pretty regularly, on behalf of the Christian worldview. And of course, Oxford in the 40s is probably like America in the 60s and 70s, in terms of its post-Christian sentiments, and looking for alternatives to to be the guiding principles in life. Um, and what's interesting though is I think because of that, and he was a vigorous debunker of Christianity before he was a Christian, so he knew uh, all the special sort of not just intellectual but emotional rhythms of anti-theism, and so he could argue and write with great clarity on each side. What I like about the Screwtape Letters, quite frankly, is, and I think the way you began the interview, is that it's much more psychological. It's got very little apologetics in it.
None.
Yeah, well, I think there's one about the, Christianity and, because of the historical Jesus that, that he's probably arguing from a roughly apologetics base, but very little. It's
Yeah.
much more, it's much more about sanctification, about growing in grace.
Well, I see it as satanic apologetics.
In what sense?
It's proving the existence of Satan
Oh,
and
yes,
showing
yes.
how demonic presence actually does exist in the real world in the day to day. I Here's why I find it so relevant in modern day conversation. And you and I are sitting here in the wake of a political assassination, and it doesn't seem like this is going to die down. It seems like the heat just keeps getting dialed up and up and up. And many have described what's going on as a heightened revival of spiritual warfare. It is a revival of Christian faith right now. There's peak sales of the Bible, peak church attendance, peak baptisms, at least in my lifetime. I was born in 85. Between 85 and now, this has been the biggest spike I've observed.
Yeah,
I know that there was a revival in the 60s as well, the Jesus Revolution. I wasn't alive then. I've only heard about it, but I think something similar is happening now. We're on the cusp of a world war, and this is the environment in which Screwtape Letters was written, and C.S. Lewis wrote this piece because people cannot tell that people are are think that their side is the right side, and they're looking for every reason to believe it. There's this tribalism in belief systems, and people are convinced that white Christian nationalists are the enemy, biggest threat to American democracy, whereas conservatives who happen to be Christians that are being told that they're white Christian nationalists are, they think that all of these woke agenda items are are the end to Western civilization, are the end to American constitutionalism, et cetera, et cetera. So it's um it's a very polarizing time, and it's very hard for somebody who is like the patient. I'm trying to imagine C.S. Lewis's patient being alive today, probably much like I was a year ago, trying to chart the correct and moral path.
yeah. Well, I do believe that the lines are being much more clearly drawn, than they have been in a long time. And I do think that Christianity offers a clear alternative to what people are being taught in schools, and what seems to be considered normal, in kind of elitist or uh, legacy mainstream uh, environments. So it's an opportune time for somebody like Lewis and Screwtape to make remake its appearance. We're getting. I think the sale of Lewis's books have been. I mean, he's just such a clear thinker for today that people and he doesn't so much of religious publishing is trying to kind of dumb things down, and I think people are not looking for that. They want some real answers. They realize that life is hard. The Christian life is not easy. It does require a high level of commitment, and I think people are ready to make that commitment.
Ugh, that is amen to that. I pray for that.
Calling all curious minds, thrill seekers, deep thinkers, debate lovers, story chasers, those who question everything, and those who just love a great read. At Skyhorse Publishing, everything is on the table, and we mean everything. We stand for free thought, bold ideas, and fearless storytelling. Whether it's uncovering the truth, teaching a new skill, or sparking inspiration, we publish books that matter. With 12,000 plus titles in print and 400 more on the way, Skyhorse is one of the most dynamic independent publishers. We challenge the status quo. We bring every perspective to the table, giving readers a place to explore, question, and grow. Want the truth behind the headlines? Read Rand Paul's Deception, The Great COVID Cover-Up. And pull back the curtain on power and public health with RFK Jr.'s The Real Anthony Fauci. Work hard, move fast, have fun, and change lives for the better. That's the Skyhorse way. Go to skyhorsepublishing.com/BTP to learn more. Skyhorse Publishing. Get reading because the sky's the limit.
Now, another thing C.S. Lewis does in the Screwtape Letters is the field of psychology.
Yeah,
It's very clear that the field of psychology has been infiltrated.
yeah, it's pretty Freudian.
Yes. And I grew up thinking Freud was, the previous generation's leading example of scientific psychology. You know, like top of it. Like he was respected. He was very much so the leading edge of the field of psychology, which institutionally I believed still to be true. And so the field of psychology has been infiltrated by Satan, according to C.S. Lewis. Do you think he actually believed that?
Lewis would be careful in terms of making a broad statement about it, but he would definitely argue that Freud was basically saying that you need to. I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so I don't really have the language for it, but the idea was you have to go with the impulses of your desires. And Lewis would argue that we would need to overcome those desires. The desires, our feelings, are not trustworthy, and they need to be controlled. And so Lewis would argue uh, for discipline, uh, uh, as opposed to what we're being told is follow your heart. He would say the heart is desperately wicked, and not to be trusted. So he would be counter. That would be a very counter argument to what we hear regularly, and that's all rooted in Freudian psychology.
Yeah, Freudian psychology has taken over the field of family law, for example, where they are now diminishing the impact, for example, of pedophilic um, desires. And it's really, really, really terrifying to see where the field of psychology has gone with that. And in reading Screwtape Letters, you have literally a demon in the field of psychology and psychoanalysis, actively setting a cultural framework for another person with authority. I mean, that's a really big statement.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I wish I was more knowledgeable of the field, but I just look at just straight Christian theology and what Christianity tells us about our passions and our desires and how corrupt they are. And that is such a counter argument to what we hear in certainly in film and in the arts uh, and uh, and primarily now in education. So I mean, all the current movements that lead to absolute liberty also lead to absolute anarchy,
Mhm.
and that's certainly the role of Satan in behind that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think about so many of our institutions that are taken as gospel in our society. It's, cultural to defer to your doctor, it's cultural to defer to your board certified therapist. It's cultural to defer to these government agencies. And to think that even in the Western, Oxford world that C.S. Lewis was living in, he was beginning to question whether or not these institutions had been infiltrated. And my gut tells me you can't write a book like that unless you're absolutely convinced.
Yeah, yeah.
He could have picked, Wormwood could have been, a Nazi soldier, right? That would have been obvious, but he didn't. He picked a city going licensed therapist that was chosen by a very nice young man of means.
You're talking about Screwtape or Wormwood?
I'm talking about Wormwood.
Because Wormwood is the young tempter that's being schooled by Screwtape, who is the experienced one who has all of this psychological knowledge at his fingertips, and he's teaching it to Wormwood to corrupt this patient.
Yeah, and Wormwood, I assume, is the therapist, right?
Well, in the sense of who is, I guess your question is who is speaking into the patient's ear?
Yeah.
In terms of making this decision over that decision, yes, then the devil on his shoulder would be Wormwood, taking instruction from Screwtape, a senior devil in hell.
Yeah. That's interesting. So the way that you read it, the way I read it was this was a therapy office and these were sessions with a therapist. I'm totally off here.
Well,
Maybe.
it's no, I mean, I think I think your initial point when you started this was the psychological depth that is in these letters, of which Screwtape is uh, is downloading to Wormwood to employ on the patient.
You know what's really funny, Max? I'm just realizing the reason why I visualized Wormwood as I did was that Wormwood reminded me, and Screw Tape coaching Wormwood reminded me of my previous therapist.
Okay. Okay.
And me being the patient to that therapist, going through all of these things, seeking guidance. Because so much of how Wormwood coaches or tempts the patient, and the fact that he's described as a patient, right? In need of something, in need of answers, in need of exploring a psychological um, endeavor. The way that it's written in Screwtape, identical to the modern day pursuit of a therapist, and the recommendations made are almost identical recommendations that many therapists are making these days to people like the patient.
Well, that's incredibly profound. And I had, that was not my experience with it, but that really does make sense, especially if you're rooted in that therapeutic world and you give it that level of authority. I mean, that's extraordinary because you're laying yourself open to say, please tell me what to do. And Wormwood is saying, okay, I will. And I'll lead you right down the path to hell.
Well, that's what most people use modern day secular therapy for is tell me what to do. I'm on my knees. I am broken, right? Go to your therapist. Spend 45 minutes in session with your therapist where you let all of it come out, all of your pain, all of your insecurity, all of your anger, all of your frustration, and try to find an answer in that therapy session. So to me, that's how I read the Screwtape Letters. I had no idea that this is kind of a demon sitting on a shoulder. I actually, I physically, I physically saw Wormwood as a demon possessed human that was coaching in a modern day psychotherapy environment.
Well, what's really interesting, you know, uh, I we just received the rights, our company, to make a film
Hmm.
of the Screwtape Letters. It's an option thing, and what you just described is quite a magnificent it's a at least a possible avenue to to articulate this in a very credible way.
Well, yeah, I see it in New York. I see it taking place in New York, and I see the patient character so clearly in my mind. As honestly, I see him as this a character much like Jacob, my fiance, who I'm marrying. We're both in our 40s now, but he was a young man in New York who went to psychotherapy instead of, he wasn't Christian then, instead of a pastor, and he was a seeker. He was a spiritual seeker, really good young man in New York, but just continued to get pushed kind of in the wrong, he just didn't quite figure it out. He was close. He wanted to be there. He wanted to be moral actor in all things related to these big decisions in his life. But he kind of just, it was just that little nudge that sent him the wrong way. And really did pursue a therapist, a board certified therapist to answer these foundational questions in life. And he would go there to seek clarity. He wasn't a Christian then. And that's how I saw this in my head. Taking place instead in London. And I saw this young man navigating a very confusing modern world, going to his therapist, Wormwood, who is a demon infested therapist.
Well, I tell you what, I'm really glad you articulated that because that really does give me food for thought.
I have one more question for you, Max. My last question is when you take on screw tape, do you feel haunted afterwards? And do you have to go take a shower and wash screw tape off? How do you do it?
I enjoyed it. It's in theater, uh, literary evil is a lot of fun. Playing Iago, playing people like Hannibal. That it's just so much fun. So, uh, and also because you're revealing so much uh, good in a inverted way that uh, I found it to be incredibly satisfying. I mean, it's a very physical role. So that part, particularly as I get older, I find really challenging. But the idea of being as an actor, being that smart for that period of time, uh, and to be able to take on those parts of yourself that you can't do in real life, uh, they do tend to be quite fun. And I've learned so much. I mean, I owe Lewis so much. Uh, I take the work very seriously, but I also take what it does to the audience in a very positive way. I mean, for it's very entertaining because it's theater, but for a lot of people, it's super convicting, and for some people, based on the responses we get, it's a life-changing experience, and because of that, I love doing it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you for doing it. And thank you for spending the time with me today.
Delighted. Thank you, Nicole. Thank you very much.